Welcome to Aging Insights. I'm Melissa Chalker, Deputy Director of the New Jersey Foundation for Aging. The Foundation's mission is to enable seniors to live with independence and dignity in their communities. Aging Insights is produced by the New Jersey Foundation for Aging to provide information and resources to boomers, seniors, and caregivers, the primary focus being to share important information and connect people to community-based programs. You may not have heard about them, but New Jersey's Office of the Ombudsman for the Institutionalized Elderly provides some very important services. Here to talk to us today about the programs and services are New Jersey's Ombudsman, Jim McCracken, and Volunteer Advocate Coordinator, Janet Khanlian. Thank you both for joining me today. I'm really excited to have you here to talk about the Ombudsman's office, as well as some particular programs that you provide there. Jim, if you could just start off reminding our audience, because people might not know what the Ombudsman's office is, and that title, the New Jersey Office of the Ombudsman for the Institutionalized Elderly, that's a lot of words. What exactly does that mean, and why does the office exist?
Well, thank you very much for having us on the show, and we appreciate the opportunity to get out and be able to talk to the public about the vital services we provide vulnerable seniors living in licensed long-term care communities. We're part of a national resident-focused advocacy group that seeks to provide the health, safety, welfare, civil and human rights of people who are 60 years and older who live in licensed long-term care settings. And we work to bring about systems change on local, state, and federal levels for that population.
So just so people understand at home, when we say institutionalized or when you say licensed long-term care settings, you're talking about nursing homes and assisted livings, is that
that's correct. The easy way to remember it is I try to, when I ask people, when people ask me that question, is I would say if it's licensed, regulated, or funded by any sort of government agency, it's probably our jurisdiction. But if it's not and you contact our office, we'll certainly get you to the appropriate agency where you can be provided help and services. But generally, we're nursing homes, assisted living, boarding homes, residential health care communities, continuing care retirement communities, and the two non-residential areas we have are adult medical and social daycare centers.
Okay, so in addition to residential settings, also where people are going for like a medical day care type of setting, you also would oversee those facilities?
We don't oversee those facilities, but we advocate on behalf of those who are getting services from those providers.
That's a good distinction. So let's tell people that your office is responsible for advocating for the people that are in those facilities, not for the overall ratings or anything else of those facilities, correct?
Absolutely correct. But if in the course of our advocacy in solving a person's problems, we suspect there's criminal activity or regulatory violations, with the resident's consent, we will refer to the appropriate agency
for that. So, and just so people understand, could you give us an example of a reason why someone might call your office, or what it is that, and after they call, how would you intervene to help in that situation?
Sure. The Older Americans Act requires that every state and U.S. territory must have a long-term care ombudsman to advocate on behalf of residents. Here in New Jersey, we're a little unique in that we are the state agency that gets complaints of abuse, neglect, and exploitation from mandatory reporters. So anybody through the course of their employment who has a reasonable suspicion that a resident of that long-term care community is being abused, neglected, or exploited by anyone, it can even be resident to resident, must report that to our office. Now, all long-term care providers do have a system internally for dealing with these cases, and typically we get a mandatory report from the provider itself, but the individual who works there certainly can and in many circumstances does report to our office. We do get complaints from a number of other individuals as well. We get complaints from residents themselves. We get complaints from friends, from relatives, obviously family members being very common, whatnot. And we even get anonymous complaints. And with the anonymous complaint, we will open cases because we realize some people are just very concerned about a situation, but concerned about any repercussions it may have in them.
Oh, sure.
And even when a person does not file an anonymous complaint, it's important to know that we keep the identity of the complainant confidential.
Right. So you're not going to walk into a facility and say, we're here because so-and-so called, and then we're going to now investigate this, right?
Absolutely not.
You just come in and say what your there for.
If we even say that.
Right.
We might, based on the type of complaint, we may come in and we may interview several residents so that particular resident can't be identified who the complaint was about. We may do some chart reviews, we may talk to staff, we may talk to volunteers in the building, whatever, and certainly the resident themselves, because we have to get the consent. We make every attempt to try to keep things as confidential as possible. But the complainant would never be identified.
And can you maybe give us an example of what a complaint would be, what a valid complaint is for someone to call and report?
Sure. Unfortunately, many of the cases we get are very disturbing and concerning. But we do get a lot of cases, complaints of financial exploitation. The typical offender there is a family member, typically a son or daughter. We get a lot of complaints regarding involuntary transfer and discharge issues, where a resident is potentially being transferred or discharged from a long-term care provider, and that is not driven by them. But unfortunately, the largest category of cases that we get is abuse. And abuse can be verbal, can be physical, can be assault, can be sexual abuse, can be confinement, could be neglect. Neglect we define as a professional's failure to follow their standards of care, and that's unfortunately the largest number of cases we get.
So if someone has a loved one in a facility and they feel like any of those things are happening to that individual, they can call your office.
They can call our office, they can fax us, or they can email us.
And then someone, as you said before, comes out to the facility and investigates, whether that be interviewing other residents, including the resident who's been identified in the complaint, as well as reviewing medical records and staff interviews, I'm assuming, and that sort of thing?
Yes. I have staff who have law enforcement backgrounds as well as registered nurses. So based on the nature of the complaint, we'll be assigned to one of those individuals, and they will come out and investigate the complaint, get the consent of the resident, make sure that we resolve it to their satisfaction. And again, we work with local law enforcement, the Attorney General's office, county prosecutors, and any state agency or federal government agency that has regulatory jurisdiction as well.
And I'm sure depending on the complaint, the investigation and the resolution or intervention, it looks different, depending on the case too, right? I mean, not every case has the same intervention, right? You're going to have different, if it's abuse, it's going to be about getting the abuser out of the picture, or, if it's neglect, it's about reprimanding that facility so that these things don't happen again. Is that?
We open over 3,000 cases a year, and they're all unique.
Yeah. It's unfortunate that it's that many, but it's good that there is an office there to look after folks. So I think that's a great example for everyone watching as to what the role of your office is in our state. But we're here today to kind of highlight a specific program under your office, which is the Volunteer Advocate Program. Can you maybe explain to people what that is and how that fits into what your office does?
Absolutely. It's a program that I am extremely proud of. And that we have focused on since I have been in office, been appointed to this office by the governor in 2010. When I came into the office in 2010, we had less than 140 volunteers. We're happy to have over 270 now. And because our paid staff, so to speak, is busy really investigating a lot of cases of abuse, neglect, and exploitation, complaints that we get into our office. The volunteers, although they assist in those matters in virtually all cases, but they're the ones who are doing the day-to-day advocacy for vulnerable seniors who live in licensed long-term care communities, primarily nursing homes with the Volunteer Advocate Program. And they're developing the relationships, and they are someone that the residents can confide with to talk about issues, to talk about concerns, to talk about complaints, to talk about joys too. And many people who live in licensed long-term care settings don't have family in the area or any family or at all who is advocating on their behalf. So the volunteer advocate in many circumstances fulfills that role, and they do a fantastic job.
Sure. So while your office is there and receives complaints or calls about concerns at facilities, the volunteer advocates are more kind of like the eyes and ears. They're going out into the facilities and checking up on how things are going and communicating with the residents. Is that a good explanation?
Yes.
Okay. And so Janet is here to give us a little bit more detail about the program, but I have to say that I really enjoy hearing how proud you are of this program and what the role is of those. So I'm really glad that you're both here today to share it with us. And Janet is here to give us some of the details of the Volunteer Advocate Program. So as Jim said, and I kind of tried to recap of the Volunteer Advocates being really the eyes and ears of the Ombudsman's office. And so if you could just explain to us who the volunteer advocates are, how your office finds them, and that sort of thing.
Some good questions.
Yes.
There's no quintessential volunteer advocate. Our advocates come from all walks of life, all different backgrounds, and all ages. Our youngest advocate now is 26, and our oldest is going to be 92.
Well, that's a pretty wide range.
We have a wide range. They're recruited in a variety of ways. We do have an outreach coordinator that is very active. And sometimes you might even walk into a diner and see a placemat that has call, gives our number, etc. We also, Jim participates in shows like this. We have letters to the editor. Some really popular method of recruiting volunteers has been these little senior magazines. Get a lot of calls through those, and then we, as all of our coordinators, are 4 people that pretty much do what I do, also get a lot of referrals from other people.
Sure.
So the advocate position itself was, very well explained by Jim. I think we're the proactive piece of this organization.
Sure.
Because the advocate is assigned to usually just one facility. That facility becomes their facility, so to speak. And their consistent presence allows for the resident to gain some trust, which Jim already talked about. And after a while, they're waiting for the advocate to come in the door. And
so how often would a volunteer advocate visit the facility that they're assigned to?
Good question. We ask them to go at least once a week, give 4 hours a week to the program. And some people go 2 or 3 times a week. Some people go for many more hours than the 4 hours. They, as Jim said earlier, their goal is to build relationships and walking around, talking to the residents, finding out what their concerns are. And when they give us permission, then the advocate can advocate for them. We do need to get permission. They're adults, they're not children.
Right. That's a very good distinction to make, that while they're there to advocate on behalf of these individuals, they can't just come in and do whatever they want. They have to get permission to report anything or to advocate on behalf of that individual.
Yes. They have to respect the confidentiality of the resident.
Sure. And so their requirement in terms of reporting back to your office, because they have to go there weekly, are they giving you some type of standard report or just when there's an issue?
Another good question.
I've got a lot of them.
Yeah, and they're all good. We ask them to do a couple of things while they're there. They should be taking notes, number one, and then they should be checking out with a staff member. Many times it's the administrator or the director of nursing, and then they do a weekly report. And the weekly report will sometimes be given at that time to the administrator, depending upon how complex it is, or be given to that person maybe a couple of days later. But there's a reporting piece, and that's an important piece. Otherwise, you just essentially have someone walking around the facility, which is not what we want. We want someone there to resolve issues.
Sure, and as you said, build a relationship, and that's a very important piece of the program.
All about,
and it's
Jim
the difference of using the volunteer advocates versus using a staff person to do that sort of role. So I kind of jumped right into what they do when they get to the facility, but we skipped right from recruiting to that. So in between there's training that happens.
Yes, there's training, and I also have to say that the recruitment process is quite involved.
Yeah.
It's normally we get a contact from the potential advocate. They fill out an application. There's a telephone screening. After the telephone screening, then there's a one-on-one interview, reference check, criminal background check, and then they get to come to training.
Right. So this isn't I call your office and say I want to be a volunteer advocate and I'm in a facility the next day. There's a process here of screening to make sure that they're appropriate for the position, for the role of being a volunteer advocate.
Absolutely. Many people they think they want to do this, they're excited about it, but honestly when they hear about the logistics, they're thinking, you know, I want to be more of a friendly visitor. And maybe it's not for me.
Maybe it's not, yeah. So that's great that there's a process of, I'm sure on the telephone interview or the screening, that you're explaining to them what their responsibility is so that they can figure out if it's a fit for them as well as you figuring out if it's a fit for you.
Absolutely, and we do it delicately.
Yes, well you have to, yeah. We talked about there not being, you know, a picture perfect person in terms of age or anything, but they also don't need to have any prerequisites like a certain degree or a career background. It can be...
No, they have to be 21. The major criteria is that they want to help this vulnerable population, and they have a passion for it, and they're willing to put the work into it.
Great. And so once they've been screened and approved, they go through the training process. Can you describe to us what the training process is like?
Our training process is actually a certification program.
Okay.
When I started this, about the same time Jim started, there was a wonderful training manual, there was a pretty good model, but things changed, the program had to evolve. So right now what we have is a pretty updated program which focuses on everything from residents' rights to ethics to how to handle complaints. The program is 4 full days. It's very interactive. The material is delivered by people who are content experts, such as Jim McCracken, our general counsel, nurse investigators, and at the end of the day, people walk out, and the goal is for them to walk out with a new lens. If they were lawyers, we don't want them looking at the facility as a lawyer.
Right.
If they were doctors, we also don't want that. We want them to look at it through a lens of an advocate. And if we've done that, then we've done a good job.
Right. So the training, as you said, is 4 days, and it's 4 days of, you know, really comprehensive things, because you're teaching them, as you say, to be an advocate, but probably also about how the nursing home business operates, and maybe giving them some regulatory guidelines in which to conduct themselves.
There's a whole unit on the long-term care environment, and also in those cases we do bring in the right staff to teach these units, so they're getting the information from the content experts. Many people have some experience in long-term care, but most don't. So, yeah, you're right, they need to be immersed.
Yeah, and so they're probably learning a little bit about long-term care settings, a little bit about gerontology, and maybe, you know, learning about older adults and that sort of thing. So it's a really comprehensive training.
11 modules.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, 11 modules over 4 days, and then they're given a certification exam, which they're ready for.
Yeah.
And after that, once it's all been achieved, we have them shadow. So.
Okay, so they go through the 4-day training.
Yes.
Then they take an exam.
Yes.
And I'm amazed at this exam process.
Right.
So I'm assuming at the end of the 4th day they take the exam, or is it a complete separate? Okay.
Yeah, at the end of the 4th day.
And is it, you know, multiple choice? Is it?
Oh, come on! You're all right. Yes, it's actually a lot of different. It's a good instrument.
Okay,
you know,
good.
to measure their achievements.
Right.
It is multiple choice. It's fill-ins. It's short-term answers. It's comprehensive.
Sure.
We don't want people who are watching this program to be discouraged.
Yeah, I'm not trying to discourage anyone from
becoming
don't be afraid of the test.
Because of the exam.
Don't be afraid of the test.
Everyone is well prepared.
Everyone's well prepared, and we have never lost one yet. Okay.
Well, that's good. I was going to ask that.
No,
about the success rate.
Yeah.
But it is it's a terrific program. We've had so much input from the people who know what they're doing in the field. We use music, we use videos, we use instruments to identify, you know, where they're at with certain pieces of the material. And at the end of the day, people will say, I didn't expect this. We received something much more than we thought we were going to get, and we really, really are, they'll say, blown away by it. In a positive way.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, you want people who are going to be advocating on behalf of older adults living in facilities to have an understanding of what their role is and of what how someone should be treated in those environments. And so I think a training that comprehensive is really amazing to put people through that. And so after their exam, then as you were starting to say, they shadow someone who's currently...
They will shadow probably at least 2 people, 2 to 4 times. And the person that they shadow will fill out a form which evaluates the potential advocate and share it with the regional coordinator. And then, if it all goes like we'd like it to, the person will be placed in one facility. And that's a process as well.
Yeah, finding the right facility, I'm sure, because if people call and they live in a certain area, they might want to, be assigned to a facility that's within a
geography.
Yeah, within their area, not somewhere they're going to have to drive really far to get to. Or right.
Yes, exactly the case. So we do try to place them close to home. Sometimes it's not possible, or sometimes if someone speaks a particular language, a second language, we have certain units, as Jim will say, within the state that are comprised of mostly one particular group, whether they speak Russian or Chinese or whatever, so I will try to get that person to go to that facility.
Sure,
and I know my colleagues would do the same thing.
Sure, if there's a need, obviously, for a bilingual individual who can communicate to residents who have speak another language, then that obviously would be a good fit for them, regardless of the geography, I guess.
Yes, we will try to lure them there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so this is a really interesting, because again, I want people to understand that this isn't, I call up and say I want to be a volunteer advocate and you're there. This is a process which is wonderful for the training and the exam and the evaluation, and then they're assigned to the facility. And so we started to talk about when they get to the facility and how they operate and what their role is there, and building relationships with residents. But I assume they should also alert staff of their role. They should introduce themselves to somebody.
There's a formal placement process where my colleagues and I will set up an appointment with the administrator, bring the advocate to this meeting, and introduce them to all the department heads, let them get a sense of how the facility operates.
Right. So I want people to know that they're not a secret shopper. They're not going to tiptoe in and blend into the thing. No. This is a formal process where they're introduced, as you said, to the management of the building and the leadership, so that people know who they are and what their role is while they're visiting, right?
Yes, and while they're there, they're going to be asking questions, of the staff, so they need to know who the staff are and what their roles are, and the staff needs to get comfortable with the advocate too.
Sure. Absolutely, because I think it's important, as Jim, mentioned, the relationship building. I think it's not just about relationship building with the residents, but also with the staff, so that they understand the role of the person coming in too. Because, obviously, doing their job, they, might feel awkward about someone coming in and evaluating them or asking questions. But if they're acquainted with the role and why the volunteer advocate is there, then it might make that a little easier.
Yes, and you're segueing into something very important that Jim also mentioned. We are resident-driven.
Right.
And we train the advocates to speak to the residents and not observe employees.
Right.
The focus is the resident. What are the resident's needs? What does the resident want that he maybe or she isn't getting? And our advocates might be the only person that visits that resident that doesn't have, I don't want to say their own agenda, but has only the resident's needs in mind.
And someone who's somewhat objective, because if I'm going to a facility to visit my mother or my aunt or somebody, I'm going to be like, oh, well, why isn't she getting this and why isn't she getting that? Whereas someone who's been trained as a volunteer advocate is really more objective and looking at it from a different lens of
from what the resident wants.
Sure.
I'm sure Jim will attest to there are times when a family member wants something, but the resident doesn't.
Right.
Those always create challenging situations.
True. Right. It's so true.
So, so that's why we try to assuage the, I wouldn't say fears, but the feelings of these nursing home staff and saying, we're here for the resident. We're not here to observe the employees.
Right.
And that, I think, that's a good way to introduce the advocate.
Yeah. I think this is a terrific program because, as you said, it is resident-driven, and this, on top of all the other things that your office does, the idea that there's someone there who's just focused on making sure the residents get what they want or what they need is terrific. So if someone has heard all this and they want to be a volunteer advocate, they should call the office or visit your website. Is there any information on the website that they could go and read and learn more?
Yes, they should get on our website.
Great, and we'll give that information out on the screen so that they can make a phone call, so they not only know where to call if they have a concern, but where to call if they want to help.
Absolutely.
right, and want to be part of the project.
Right.
So I really think it's a terrific program, and I really appreciate you both taking time. I know you're incredibly busy working on all of these important issues, so I appreciate you taking the time to join me today to explain to the audience what exactly your office does and about the Volunteer Advocate Program. And I hope you get some calls. I hope people are intrigued and interested and want to join the effort and what you're doing. So
we certainly respect the work that the New Jersey Foundation on Aging does, and we appreciate the opportunity to come here today and talk to you. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both very much. And thank you for sharing your time with us today as well. Again, Aging Insights is produced by the New Jersey Foundation for Aging, and it is made possible by donations to the foundation. To become a sponsor for Aging Insights programs, please go to our website at www.njfoundationforaging.org or call us in the office at 609-421-0206. All of our previous shows can be viewed on the website. We want to remind you to find out about senior services in your area. You can contact your county office on aging. Their numbers are also on our website, or you can call the state hotline at 1-877-222-3737. Thank you for watching this episode of Aging Insights, and remember, aging is everyone's business.